My name is Hilda. I am 62 years old, and for 35 years, this house in the quiet suburbs of Illinois was my sanctuary. My late husband, Anthony, built it with his own hands. Every creak in the floorboards, every rose bush in the garden, and the smell of cinnamon in the kitchen reminded me of him. When Anthony passed away 5 years ago, I thought my world had ended. But then my son, Ethan, suggested he and his wife, Patricia, move in to take care of me. At first, it felt like a blessing. I wasn't alone anymore. Patricia was charming. She baked cookies and helped me with the gardening. Ethan was the attentive son I thought I raised. But slowly, the atmosphere began to change. Conversations would stop when I entered a room. Doors were locked that used to be open. I started feeling like a guest in my own home, a nuisance they were merely tolerating. The turning point came during a rainy Tuesday evening. I was in the pantry, and they didn't hear me come in. I heard Patricia's sharp, cold voice. "How much longer, Ethan? The real estate market is peaking. If we sell this place now, we can move into that condo in the city. Your mother doesn't need 4 bedrooms and a yard she can barely maintain." Ethan's response broke my heart. "I know, honey. We just need her to sign the power of attorney. She trusts me." It won't be long. I realized then that my son wasn't protecting me. He was waiting for me to disappear. They weren't staying here for my sake. They were colonizing my life. I knew I couldn't confront them directly. They would just gaslight me and call me confused or senile. I needed proof. I needed to see what they did when they thought I was gone. I told them I was going to visit my cousin in Ohio for a week. I made a show of packing my suitcase, calling a taxi, and hugging them goodbye. Patricia had a predatory gleam in her eyes as she waved from the porch. Ethan looked guilty, but he didn't stop me. I got into the taxi, went to the airport, waited an hour, and then took an Uber back to my neighborhood. I didn't go home. I went to the house across the street, the home of my oldest friend and neighbor, Mr. Henderson. He knew Anthony, and he knew something was wrong. "Hilda, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, letting me in. I told him everything. He handed me his binoculars and pointed to my house. "You stay here as long as you need. Let's see what these kids are really up to." From Mr. Henderson's darkened living room, I watched my own house. The transformation was instant. As soon as my taxi left, Patricia stopped pretending to be the sweet daughter-in-law. She threw my favorite embroidered cushions into the trash bin on the curb. She opened a bottle of expensive wine Anthony had saved for a special occasion. They were celebrating my departure as if they had won the lottery, but that was just the beginning. That night, around 11 p.m., a white van pulled into my driveway. 2 men I didn't recognize got out. They began carrying boxes out of the house, my boxes. They were taking my antique silverware, my grandmother's china, and the small safe where Anthony kept his coin collection. Ethan was standing there, holding a clipboard, checking things off like a cold-blooded liquidator. The next morning, the betrayal took an even darker turn. From Mr. Henderson's porch, I saw a sleek, silver Mercedes pull into my driveway. A woman in a sharp business suit stepped out, carrying a briefcase. Ethan and Patricia greeted her with wide, fake smiles, the kind they used to reserve for me when they wanted a favor. They sat at the glass table on my back patio, the one Anthony bought for our 30th anniversary. Using Mr. Henderson's directional microphone, I heard the unthinkable. The woman was a representative from Golden Sunset Gardens, a low-budget, high-walled nursing home 3 towns away. "If we get her signature on these medical forms while she's stressed from her trip," Patricia whispered, "the state will approve the transfer immediately." "Is it safe?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling slightly. Patricia reached over and squeezed his hand, her eyes like ice. "It's for the best, Ethan. She's becoming a burden. She forgets things. It's for her own safety." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I wasn't forgetting anything. They were building a case against my sanity to steal my legacy. That afternoon, while they were out celebrating at an expensive restaurant, I used my spare key and slipped back into my house with Mr. Henderson acting as a lookout. The house felt violated. My photos had been turned face down. The smell of my lavender candles was replaced by Patricia's heavy, expensive perfume. It didn't feel like my sanctuary anymore. It felt like a crime scene. I found the papers on the kitchen island. It wasn't just a nursing home contract. It was a pre-sale agreement for the house. They had already listed it online as vacant and ready. They were planning to ship me off to that warehouse for the elderly and sell the roof over my head before I even returned from my fake trip. But then I found something they hadn't expected. Tucked inside the folder was a document Patricia had hidden, even from Ethan. It was an agreement with a developer to turn the lot into a luxury duplex. She wasn't just selling the house. She was planning to pocket an extra consultation fee that Ethan knew nothing about. She was betraying him just as much as he was betraying me. I took photos of everything with my phone. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I realized that the son I raised was gone, replaced by a man so weak he let a vulture lead him by the heart. I slipped back out and returned to Mr. Henderson's house just as their car pulled back into the driveway. "They're not just greedy, Arthur," I whispered to my late husband's memory as I sat in the neighbor's kitchen. "They're cruel." Mr. Henderson handed me a cup of strong coffee. "So, what's the plan, Hilda? You can't stay hidden forever." I looked across the street at my house, seeing it not as a home, but as a trap I was about to spring. "I'm not going to Ohio," I said, my voice hardening. "And I'm certainly not going to Golden Sunset Gardens. If they want to play real estate, let's see how they handle a Davenport-style foreclosure." It was time to call my nephew, a high-powered attorney in Chicago who Anthony had helped through law school. The counterstrike was about to begin. I waited until the next evening. Mr. Henderson drove me to the airport, and I called a taxi from there to my house, making sure Ethan and Patricia saw me arrive. When the car pulled into the driveway, they were standing on the porch, frozen. They looked like they had seen a ghost, or worse, a creditor they couldn't pay. "Mom, you're back early," Ethan stammered, his eyes darting toward the garage where the white van had been parked just 24 hours ago. Patricia forced a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "Hilda, dear, we weren't expecting you for another 4 days. Is everything okay in Ohio?" I smiled, a cold, sharp smile that didn't reach my eyes. Oh, the weather was dreadful, and I missed my own bed. "But why is the house so quiet? And where are my embroidered cushions, Patricia?" I asked, walking straight to the sofa. I saw her throat tighten. "Oh, those? I took them to the cleaners. They looked a bit dusty." I spent the next hour walking through my house like a tourist in a museum of my own life. I noted every missing item. The antique silverware? Gone. The safe? Gone. I could feel their eyes burning into the back of my neck as they followed me. Terrified that I would notice the void they had created. "Ethan, honey," I said, turning to him in the hallway. "I was looking for your father's coin collection. I wanted to hold one of the silver dollars tonight, but the safe is missing from the closet." Ethan turned a shade of gray I didn't know was possible. "The safe? I moved it, Mom, for security. You know, since you were away." "Security? From who, Ethan? From the people you invited into my home at midnight?" I didn't say it out loud. Not yet. I just nodded slowly. "Good thinking, son. You're always so protective of me." The irony was so thick, it was a wonder he didn't choke on it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my darkened room, listening. Through the thin walls, I heard them arguing. "She knows something, Ethan," Patricia hissed. "We have to move faster. Call the home tomorrow. Tell them she had episode tonight, and she's not safe to be alone." The next morning, I was downstairs before them, making a pot of strong coffee. When Patricia entered, she saw a man sitting at the kitchen table. It wasn't Mr. Henderson, it was my nephew David, the attorney from Chicago. He had a stack of documents in front of him and a very formal expression. "Who are you?" Patricia snapped, her sweet daughter-in-law mask finally slipping. David adjusted his glasses. "I'm Hilda's legal counsel, Patricia, and I'm here to discuss the Golden Sunset Gardens contract you were so kind as to leave on the kitchen island yesterday." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan walked in a moment later, stopping in his tracks. "David? What are you doing here?" David didn't look up from his papers. "I'm reviewing the inventory of this house, Ethan. It seems quite a bit of property has been removed without the owner's consent. That's called grand larceny in this state." Patricia laughed, a shrill, desperate sound. "Inventory? This is our home. We live here." I stood up, placing my coffee cup down with a firm click. "No, Patricia, you stay here. But as of 8 o'clock this morning, your lease has been terminated for cause." I pulled out my phone and played the audio recording Mr. Henderson had helped me capture from across the street. Patricia's voice filled the kitchen, cold and calculating, talking about the developer and the extra fee she was hiding from Ethan. Ethan turned to his wife, his face a mask of shock. "A developer? A secret fee? Patricia, what is she talking about?" The betrayal was now moving in circles. They were no longer a team. They were two scavengers fighting over a carcass that was suddenly very much alive. Patricia's face went from pale to a toxic shade of red. She didn't look at Ethan, she looked at David and then at me. "Recording us? In our own home? That's illegal. You're a paranoid, senile old woman, Hilda. This is exactly why we were looking at Golden Sunset. You're not well. You're hearing things and imagining conspiracies." I didn't flinch. "I'm not hearing things, Patricia. I'm seeing things, like the white van that emptied my safe, like the realtor sign you have hidden in the garage." I looked at Ethan, who was staring at his wife as if he were seeing a monster for the first time. "Ethan, did you know she had a developer ready to tear this house down? Tear it down?" Ethan's voice was a whisper. "But we were going to live here. You said we just needed the money for the investment." Patricia turned on him like a viper. "Shut up, Ethan. I was doing this for us, so we could finally leave this dusty old museum and have a real life." David cleared his throat, pulling a blue folder from his briefcase. "Actually, Patricia, the state of Illinois has very strict laws regarding the protection of the elderly. Since you've already signed a pre-sale agreement for a property you don't own, and since you've removed assets belonging to a trust, we've already filed for an emergency restraining order." "You can't kick us out!" Patricia screamed. "We have residency rights. It'll take months to evict us." She thought she was smart, playing the squatter card, but she forgot whose name was on the deed and who Anthony had entrusted with the family's future. "Actually," David said, sliding a document across the table, "this house isn't owned by Hilda. It's owned by the Anthony Davenport Memorial Trust. And the trust bylaws state that any resident who causes intentional, emotional, or financial harm to the beneficiary, Hilda must vacate the premises within 24 hours of notice." I stood up and walked to the window. Two police cruisers were pulling up to the curb, their lights silent but flashing. Mr. Henderson was standing on his porch across the street, nodding to me. He had been my witness, and now he was my shield. "The officers are here to escort the unauthorized movers you hired back to the house to return my safe and silverware, Patricia," I said calmly. "And then they are here to ensure you and Ethan pack your bags. You have 1 hour." Ethan broke down. He slumped into a chair, crying into his hands. "Mom, please, I didn't know everything. I just wanted to be successful like Dad. I thought I was doing the right thing." I looked at my son, and for a moment, I felt the old urge to comfort him. But then I remembered the binoculars. I remembered him checking the clipboard while they stole his father's coins. "Success isn't stolen from your mother's bedroom, Ethan," I said, my voice cold as ice. "It's built, and you haven't even laid the first brick." I turned to the door to meet the officers. Patricia was still screaming, threatening to sue everyone, but her voice was becoming background noise. One of the officers, a man who had known Anthony for years, tipped his hat to me. "Everything all right, Mrs. Davenport?" I nodded. "It is now, officer. There are some guests in my home who have overstayed their welcome, and I believe they have some of my property in a white van across town." As the police began to supervise the reverse move, the neighborhood watched. The neighbors I had known for decades saw the truth. Patricia tried to act like a victim, crying and shouting about elderly abuse, but David simply handed the officers the golden sunset contract. That ended the performance. By sunset, the house was quiet. The silver was back in the sideboard. The safe was back in the closet. But the house felt different. It was empty, yet for the first time in years, it felt clean. I sat on the porch with a glass of tea, watching the sky turn purple, but the battle wasn't over. There was still the matter of the developer fee Patricia had already spent. After the house was cleared, the real investigation began. David discovered that Patricia hadn't just removed furniture. She had diverted funds from the trust by forging my signature on several maintenance checks. She had been living a double life, funneling money into a secret account to pay off the developer's initial bribe. Patricia was arrested 3 days later, not for the eviction, but for fraud and embezzlement. When the police took her away from their temporary rental apartment, she was still screaming that I was the one who ruined her life. She couldn't understand that the only person who ruined her life was the one she saw in the mirror. Ethan was left with nothing because he had signed the Golden Sunset documents as a witness. He was technically an accomplice, though David managed to keep him out of jail due to lack of criminal intent. However, he was ordered to pay back every cent that had been stolen from the trust. His professional reputation in the suburb was destroyed. No one wanted to work with the man who tried to warehouse his own mother. A week later, Ethan came to the house. He didn't have his key anymore. I had changed the locks the very first night. He stood on the sidewalk, looking at the roses Anthony had planted. He looked older, tired, and deeply broken. I watched him from the porch, the same porch where I had stood when I returned from my trip. "I'm leaving for Chicago, Mom," he said, his voice barely audible. "I found a job working construction. It's not much, but it'll help me start paying back the trust. I know sorry doesn't mean anything anymore. I just wanted you to know I'm gonna try to be the man Dad thought I was." I didn't invite him in. The wounds were too deep and the trust was a pile of ash. "Work hard, Ethan," I said. "And remember, Dad didn't build this house with money. He built it with respect. Until you understand that, this house will never be your home again." I watched him walk away, and for the first time, I didn't feel like crying. I felt peace. Mr. Henderson came over later that evening with a bottle of wine. We sat on the back patio, the one where they had plotted my demise. "So, what now, Hilda?" he asked. "The house is yours. The scavengers are gone. But it's a big place for one woman." I looked at the garden. I realized that this house shouldn't be a museum for the dead or a fortress for the lonely. "I'm going to turn the guest wing into a studio," I said, "and I've already spoken to the local community center. I'm going to host gardening and embroidery classes here twice a week. This house needs life, Arthur. It needs people who value it." I also decided to set up a scholarship in Anthony's name for kids who wanted to learn trades building, plumbing, electrical work. I wanted to help people who, like my husband, understood the value of building something with their own hands. The money that Patricia tried to steal was now going to build futures for others. Months passed. The Golden Sunset Gardens home was investigated after David filed a formal complaint about their predatory contracts with Patricia. They were eventually shut down for safety violations. It was a small victory, but it meant that no other mother would be trapped there because of a greedy child. My life became full again, but in a different way. The house was often filled with the sound of laughter from my students and the smell of fresh coffee. I learned that being a mother doesn't mean being a doormat. It means being the foundation. And if the foundation is disrespected, the whole structure has to change. I still have the binoculars Mr. Henderson gave me. I keep them on the mantle as a reminder. Not a reminder of the betrayal, but a reminder to always keep my eyes open. To see people for who they are, not for who I want them to be. Every now and then, I get a letter from Ethan. He sends a small check every month, sometimes only $50, sometimes more. He doesn't ask for anything. He just signs it with respect. It's a start. A very slow, very long start. A full year has passed since the night the police cruisers lined my street. My house is no longer a quiet museum of the past. It is a center of life. The guest wing, which Patricia once tried to turn into a developer's payday, is now a bright, airy studio. Every Tuesday and Thursday, the house is filled with the scent of fresh tea and the rhythmic sound of embroidery needles. My students don't just learn to sew, they learn that it's never too late to mend a life. Mr. Henderson remains my closest ally. We still sit on the porch, but the binoculars are gone, replaced by a chessboard or a shared book. He was the one who reminded me that while blood makes you related, loyalty makes you family. We've even started a community garden project, turning the vacant lots in our neighborhood into places of growth instead of decay. As for Patricia, her legal battles are far from over. Without my money to pay for high-priced lawyers, she was forced to accept a plea deal. She is serving community service and is under a strict court order to repay the trust. I heard she moved to another state, still trying to find someone else to fund her luxury lifestyle. I don't hold on to the anger anymore. I simply don't think of her at all. Ethan's journey is harder. He lives in a small studio apartment in Chicago and works 10-hour shifts on construction sites. He's learning what Anthony knew: the value of a blister on your palm and the satisfaction of a day's work. He calls me once a month. We don't talk about the past. He tells me about the buildings he's helping to raise, and I listen. I haven't invited him back yet, but for the first time, I think that one day I might. The Anthony Davenport Memorial Trust is thriving. The scholarship fund has already helped 3 local kids start their apprenticeships. Every time I see a young person with a toolbox, I feel like a part of my husband is still at work in this world. I realized that my inheritance wasn't the house or the coins. It was the strength to protect what is right. I often sit in the garden at twilight, near the roses that witnessed it all. I am 63 now, and I've never felt more powerful. I am no longer the widow or the victim. I am the matriarch of my own destiny. I learned that sometimes you have to lose the illusion of a family to find the reality of your own worth. The lights of the neighborhood are glowing and my home is warm. I've built walls not to hide, but to protect the peace I've earned. As I close the front door and turn the key, the new key, smile. The storm is long gone, the air is clear, and finally, I am home.